we hung out, we went to iftar. They were some of the first people that I met, and there was just a lightness. There was a speaking of queerness in public where I realized that I had created these narratives of everyone having to be behind bolted doors and whispering, when in fact that's not the case at all.
This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Thanks for joining us here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. If you don't know, you can get all of our episodes ad-free on Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. All of Mary's true crime episodes ad-free, video episodes ad-free from the ITBR interviews. Also, follow us on Instagram, please, Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I like to put a lot of exciting arts and culture clips from the podcast, TV shows, films that we've discussed. TikTok is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Long story, the Ivory Tower Boiler Room one got taken off by TikTok because it was too salacious and scandalous, in my opinion. But I might be just having an Oscar Wilde complex there, thinking, that I was causing such a sensation on TikTok. So please rate us on Apple. It really, really helps. Review us. If you're on Spotify, you can rate us there too. YouTube, please follow our YouTube channel. Please like the video, share it with your friends, your community. The only way that I can keep giving you all free, exciting podcast episodes is because of the reach of the podcast. So rating us, reviewing us, it really, really does help. Also, shout out to Sean, our intern, who, if you see the cover art, you see the edits of the podcast, that's all Sean. So amazing work by Sean. So I hope you all enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby with a very fascinating guest. I have been wanting this conversation for a long time. A fellow doctor, his doctorate is in fine arts. Just want to preface that. I'm so excited to be joined with Gaar Adams, who is an American writer and journalist. His work has been published by The Atlantic, Foreign Policy, Rolling Stone, Bloomberg, Al Jazeera, NPR, Slate, Vice, many others. He's a Penguin Random House Right Now grantee, former London Library emerging writer. He teaches creative writing in the Master of Arts program at the University of Hull. He's originally from rural Wisconsin, and he received his doctorate of fine arts from the University of Glasgow, and he is now in London. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Great to be here.
Well, I'm really, excited when I saw your book, first of all, which for everyone out there, it's called Guest Privileges, Queer Lives and Finding Home in the Middle East. And I've been wanting to have an expert on Middle Eastern culture when it comes to the LGBTQ community. So I was very just happy that your book now exists, because it's, as you probably know, hard to find a book that really explores this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certainly not, the first person to write about this, but the books are few and far between, literary narratives, both fictionalized and especially journalistic works. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I was going to actually start with an anecdote from my writing literature course, where at Seton Hall, where I am, I don't know, was opening up about some topic, and I, as I usually do, just with like having a queer studies mindset, like was doing a type of gender sexuality approach in the classroom. And I had students who were like very open about being Muslim, talking about their culture, like through a literary interpretation. And after class, I said, like, can I respectfully ask you about queerness and Islam? And like, they were very open about one student was from Palestine. The other student converted to Islam. And she said, like, this is a very tricky topic in the sense of you're going to get a various opinion depending on which, Muslim person you ask. And it seems like you bring that to bear. Like, is this Well, first of all, is this something you thought you would be delving into uh, in your journalistic writing?
I mean, yes and no, right? So I am, as you said, originally from rural Wisconsin. I grew up in a very socially conservative, white Christian um, landscape. And what my exposure to the Middle East and Islam was before September 11th was next to nothing, right? And everything that I gleaned from the region after that was through the lens of this national tragedy, right? Um, and it took many years. It took a degree in Middle Eastern Islamic Studies at New York University to disavow myself of a lot of those narratives, many of them Islamophobic, many of them racist, many of them just outright incorrect and part of a kind of propaganda. So when you say, have I, was I kind of thinking I was going to do this? No, until suddenly it felt like the only thing. It felt like the most important thing. It felt like, gosh, I have been living with these unchecked narratives in my life for years and years. And so, how can I start to redress this? For myself, for the community that I live in, for fellow Americans. Um, yeah, so it took then me studying Arabic, living in Yemen. That's what I did my third year at university. And then I moved to the Middle East shortly after I graduated, finished my undergraduate degree, and lived there for a decade. So yeah, it's been a process of disavowal, a process of learning. Yeah.
So when you were at NYU, did the topic of sexuality come up during your undergrad experience?
When I was studying, I took a course on El Ghazali. It came up there. Did it come up regularly in my chronic recitation course? No, it didn't. Is it something that I think I spoke of with friends and fellow classmates, in between class? Yeah, definitely. But like, was it part of a structured curriculum? No, it sort of wasn't, not part of my undergraduate degree. It was something that I needed to start to navigate and educate myself on when I chose to live in Yemen to study Arabic. I wanted to do an intensive Arabic language immersion program. And so when I left to go to Sana'a and live there, I began to recognize that everyone around me was terribly concerned for my safety and well-being.
Mm.
Um, and it was going to be my first time living in, really visiting the Middle East. And I recognized that I was not concerned, partially, of course, because I had been studying the region at that point for several years. Um, but it became a queer issue. It became everyone being concerned about who I was and what that meant and what I was or wasn't going to do or adhere to or look like or tell on myself because of my mannerisms, vocal stylings, affectations. Um, and then I recognized that I wasn't concerned because actually I've been growing up in a landscape where this really wasn't okay either.
Mm.
Were the legal penalties the same in rural Wisconsin? No, they weren't. But have I been operating pretty much my entire life with a dim subconscious awareness that who I am is sort of fundamentally wrong to many of the people that I live around and many people in the community that I'm a part of? Yes. And so I've always been attempting to shift in certain social situations to be cognizant of how I'm speaking, who I'm speaking with, and being aware of how I listen too.
Mm.
So that was always something, and never felt like, oh, here's this insurmountable thing. I'm going to the Middle East, and immediately, I'm going to be imperiled. That felt like, no, that's not going to be the case.
Mm. So for the listeners or viewers on YouTube, uh, that idea of pinkwashing and homo nationalism, if you don't, I mean, you know Jasper Puar, I'm sure, but I remember as a PhD student reading um, Terrorist Assemblages by Jasper Puar, and that whole idea of like what your friends and family were saying, which is, how could you think about going to a like Muslim majority country and then think that you'll be fine with your queerness when you've just said, why don't we have that same kind of outlook when it comes to very, very conservative social areas of the US?
Absolutely.
Like, did you see that in real? So you saw that in real time with friends and family.
I saw it in real time. I narrativized this in the book where I actually, I still can't believe this happened. I had two of my high school educators send me kind of vitriolic emails when they found out through, the powers of nascent social media that I was studying the Middle East, that I was studying Arabic, and then that I was going to live in Yemen. And one of them said, they are going to kill you, they're going to stone you. It was all very Islamophobic, just awful rhetoric. And I felt really sorry for her, and I did not respond to her. I had another educator who encouraged me instead to go to Israel to study the Middle East. And I had no interest in going to a place that employs hyperbolic Islamophobic narratives around sexual and gender intolerance about the countries that surround it to justify the occupation and destruction of Palestine. So that was not interesting to me. And so it was a process of pushing back against that again and again.
Yeah, well, and you know, isn't it true that yes, Tel Aviv is seen as this like
The
queer
bastion.
bastion, but like how about areas outside of Tel Aviv?
Yeah, absolutely.
In
Absolutely.
Israel? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in thinking about other cities and areas that exist in the Muslim Middle East, there are landscapes, of course, there are metropolitan areas, there are communities that are thriving, some of which are, of course, not at all part of a kind of Western awareness. And so that felt continually frustrating. And that again felt like something that I needed to write about, which is that here I was, studying Arabic in Yemen. And then as soon as I finished my undergraduate degree, I was moving to the Gulf, which, there's a whole other rhetoric around what that place is and what it represents and who visits it and who lives there. And what isn't there. And so that then began a whole new process of discovering queer communities and pushing back against entrenched narratives. So it's continually been a process, and that's really what led me to the book. There were times when I felt like, gosh, is this the right thing to do? To be writing in some regards from a defensive posture, where I'm kind of pushing back against the worst, most bad faith reader, and yet that rhetoric is so powerful and so pervasive. So in some regards, it often was what fueled what I wrote and how I wrote.
Yeah. And being right outside the city, I mean, um, I was, and I'm so excited with Zoran Mamdani's
Mm.
win, with like the policies that, like the visibility he has with the community. And at the same time, though, I see like Deborah Messing, which I don't follow, but I still see, her complaining and blaming him for everything from, taxis not running on her time to the snow to whatever it is. And even people I saw myself in community with and like just spreading propaganda about him while he's in like doing drag brunches or, in all different gay nightclubs. And it's like, this just isn't true. And I'm just wondering, why do you feel like this mythology, this very prejudicial mythology is existing to, attack, say, a Zoran Mamdani?
Yeah. I mean, the the racialized other, right? Um, there have been too few Muslims who are visible in politics in America. And there continues to be a rhetoric around who they are and who they're not, and who gets to be an American and who doesn't, and who we should be suspect of, and who deserves these positions of power. And particularly someone like Deborah Messing, who, I don't even want to, I don't even want to spend the time
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
getting
you don't
in.
have to. You don't have to. I'm
Why,
just bringing her
why
up
that?
because
But
she's
yeah,
like in the news so much. But yeah.
absolutely. And this is it, right? We sort of we watch someone like a Deborah Messing character in the same way that we sort of watch a car crash, right? Kind of because we can't look away. And in some regards, it's just someone becoming unhinged, and not deserving that kind of power and airtime. And yet we kind of can't, we continue to breathlessly talk about it,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I mean, I hope there's an awakening with her eventually, but that's not going to be on us. You know,
It's not.
he has to do the education.
Yeah.
But what I'm so interested in is in guest privileges in your book, you breathe life to so many narratives of queer people that you meet in the United Arab Emirates, specifically Dubai. And right, like Dubai has its mythical Emerald City, you
Mhm.
know, narrative around it. Like, what first surprised you when you were spending time? Like, even before meeting, I know there's a story with two men we'll get into that you meet, but what first surprised you just about the culture of, say, the United Arab Emirates? The spring season is here, which means there's a new issue of the Gay and Lesbian Review called Victorian Times, all about my favorite period of literature, the 19th century. And you'll see a rugged Walt Whitman on the cover and the dandy Oscar Wilde. Well, guess what? My first article is now published in the Gay and Lesbian Review called Once Upon a Time in Camden. It's the intro to my book, which looks into their queer literary relationship, but also Whitman and Wilde's homoerotic poetics, and specifically what Whitman does with male same sex desire before the category of homosexuality even existed. Like, how did he even express this in his poetry? Well, you'll have to read my book to find out. Book coming soon. If you know of a publisher, let me know. I'm shopping around right now. But this Victorian issue is so special with the Gay and Lesbian Review. There's articles on Dr. Jekyll and Victor Frankenstein. I'm about to see The Bride, which I can't wait to see. And right, Guillermo del Toro's new Frankenstein is all the rage. There's an article on Monte Cristo's Women in Love, Tchaikovsky's Men. I love Tchaikovsky's ballet. I'm particularly an admirer of The Sleeping Beauty, one on Captain Cobb. There's film and TV shows reviewed like Heated Rivalry, Boots, Kiss of the Spider Woman, which, if you don't know, I had an episode with Jeremy Fox from the Gay and Lesbian Review, the managing editor, and Colin Carmen and Joseph Federico, and we talked all about Heated Rivalry. You have to listen to it. And Kiss of the Spider Woman, I keep recommending to everyone. It is an astounding film. Boots, I actually had the creator Greg Cope White on the podcast too. You'll have to listen to his interview. Also, if you haven't heard our episode on the kink issue of the magazine, it's really, really interesting. And the ethnography one. And yes, there will be an episode soon about the Victorian issue. So get your hands on the Gay and Lesbian Review. The digital subscription is really easy to get, glreview.org. The print subscription also, head on over to the website, click subscribe, use the promo code ITBR choice. You get a free issue of the magazine. Choose the Victorian issue, will you? So head to their Instagram, their TikTok. I love the Gay and Lesbian Review. I get so many book recommendations, TV show, film recommendations. One of the films that I can't wait to watch is in this issue. I want to say it's pronounced Pillion or Pillion. I think I made it French there with Alexander Skarsgård. So Enjoy your reading, everyone. And if you're reading the Gay and Lesbian Review, please reach out to me. I want to let them know, that you all listening to this podcast are reading their magazine. Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episodes, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Tukolsky, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, a brief guide for busy students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student-friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading.
Yeah. Um, how is it spoken of, first of all? We understand it often to be a repressive, vapid petrostate, sort of devoid of culture, and sort of intolerant in many regards. Um, are some of these narratives based in concerns around human rights abuses of migrant laborers? Yes. Is some of that true? Yes. Is a lot of it overblown, misguided, and then employed to enhance other narratives? Yes, it is. I lived in Abu Dhabi for roughly a decade, so the capital city of the United Arab Emirates, which is about an hour south of Dubai. So I spent, many a weekend, had many friends in Dubai, the other 6 Emirates as well. So, extensively traveled throughout the United Arab Emirates, throughout the Gulf, for a significant period of time. When I arrived, what was I most surprised by? I think how much I had internalized these narratives of repression and concern. What I narrativized early on in the piece, I open with realizing that I had some anxiety about what I could and couldn't do. I first arrived in the UAE during the month of Ramadan. And I had realized that I had fears about how I could operate in public, right, around what I should be wearing, who I should, how, what I should be wearing, what I should be eating, how I should be eating. Um, and I realized that I really had some anxiety around it. And I headed to an ice rink actually on one of my first days in the UAE because I'm a figure skater.
Wow.
And it felt like here's a way that I can ground myself. I can get over jet lag. I can head to an ice rink. I can start to form a community. I think that was already something that I was aware of wanting to do. And I ate a granola bar in a toilet cubicle because I was like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble. Someone's going to report me. This notion of a kind of uh, ever-present nanny state where you're sort of constantly in danger of slipping up was something that I realized was pervading all of my actions,
Mm.
which was just untrue. And so, I headed out onto the ice, and truly, within the first several hours of arriving in the UAE, I was meeting a fellow figure skater who turned out to be queer. And here was a man who I then formed a lasting friendship with, and continues to sort of poke fun at me about how kind of uptight I was. And it took some unlearning and some real reckoning with where does this come from? How am I already having internalized what I can and cannot do in the month of Ramadan without ever having been in an Islamic country during this holy month, right? So it's like
Mm.
that kind of undoing is quite a process. And so those kind of incidental conversations were delightful and surprising. And I think also just filled with a kind of joy. When I met Imran and then a group of his friends, we hung out, we went to iftar. They were some of the first people that I met, and there was just a lightness. There was a speaking of queerness in public where I realized that I had created these narratives of everyone having to be behind bolted doors and whispering, when in fact that's not the case at all. And it feels now, after having spent a decade plus in this region, it feels silly and based in xenophobic, Islamophobic narratives, and yet that was so entrenched in me for a very long time.
Yeah, well, and you talked about the way that narratives get presented to the public and like the xenophobic narratives. I mean, all I can think when you say Abu Dhabi, I feel like the majority of listeners are going to think of Sex in the City too, which
Absolutely.
is like the entrance for a lot of Americans when they see it in Hollywood. And boy, oh boy, is that I mean, what is your feeling of Sex in the City too and how it presents the culture?
Yeah, it's kind of abhorrent, actually. It's funny, right? So, kind of each place that I've been had its own kind of American cultural touch point. When I first was moving to Yemen, everyone referenced Friends. Chandler trying to get away and moved to like 123 Yemen Street. I was not a like Friends fanatic, so I can't remember exactly, but this was repeated to me over and over and over, and I was like, wow, this is actually, besides for the USS Cole bombing, this is how we understand Yemen, through an American sitcom and through an act of terrorism. And then when I was moving to Abu Dhabi, at first it was Garfield, because Garfield ships off, his sort of nemesis Nirmal to Abu Dhabi in a box to get rid of her. And so again, it's like it is this narrative of being removed and sort of at the furthest distance. And then, God bless, Sex and the City came along, and that became the other touch point, which was this this notion of a place again that's culturally vapid, that has sort of wholesale imported Western values, but especially aesthetic sensibilities, which come into kind of like horrific tension with traditional Islamic values. And I think a lot of that's what activates the film as well. It's like you have these women kind of in the end, if I recall correctly, sort of finally meeting a local woman, and it's all through the
Yes.
lens of like what she's wearing and what she's not wearing and who she's allowed to be not in public, and it's just a really reductive narrative.
Yeah,
So
like
yeah,
Carrie sees all of these women like behind closed doors with these fabulous shoes. And she's
yeah.
like, oh, I can connect with them because of the shoes.
That's the only way that I
And it's
can
like that
see.
was the only way, Carrie, you could connect with these women is through
Yeah.
shoes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it says a lot about Carrie, and
Mm,
her blinders.
sure.
But well, what did you learn about the clothing? Because I do feel like when I hear about the clothing, that is like the nervousness people get. Like if you're traveling to say the United Arab Emirates, is like, well, could I wear a bathing suit? Can I wear, am I going specifically women? I will say too. It does seem there's more
Absolutely.
of a pressure on women than men when it comes to clothing.
That's definitely right. And right. So, I do not want to be prescriptive and say that everyone's, concerns about attire are, entirely misguided or just incorrect. But, I just quite frankly, was just often wearing shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops, and that's how I went about my day. And I think there are two issues at hand, right? One is the notion of, are there police that are walking around that are going to arrest you? There are not morality police that are going to do this, but I think that's the pervasive narrative. There's a kind of way in which some of what had occurred in Saudi Arabia, with the kind of religious police, um, gets grafted on to other countries in the Gulf or the Middle East in general. And so again, there's this notion that it is a kind of monolith culturally and especially in terms of legal frameworks, which of course is not the case. So by and large, when you're walking around in a place like the UAE, when you head into public spaces, malls, restaurants, sometimes there will be signs outside about wearing respectful clothing. Um, I feel as though anecdotally, over the 10 years that I spent there, you saw those less often. And you did see people wearing kind of whatever. And this is the thing that's also really important about the Gulf, which I think people somewhat understand, but often kind of forget, which is that, roughly 4 to 5 residents, 80% of the population are non-citizens. And so this idea that there is this kind of giant Emirati population that is, immediately distrustful of, Western aesthetics isn't the case. And you have people from all walks of life, from all cultural landscapes, walking around the UAE and the Gulf, and doing so often without a care. So that's sort of one issue. And the other issue is, how have we again internalized notions of what Islam allows or doesn't allow women or people to wear? Oftentimes when I was walking around, especially early on, um, I was more often encountering South Asian migrants and immigrants than I was anyone else. And, so you're seeing just a wide swath of cultural attire, of ways people are going about their day. And again, I think it's also this notion of like, the nanny state of like, well, is someone just always wanting to trip you up? And no, everyone's just sort of generally going about their day, which again feels like sort of obvious and yet I think does bear repeating.
Yeah. Well, even like bookstores, like, and this is just from my own ignorance. So, I'm like, uh, I know you're not the only, like you said, there's others who have done this work too, but because you are here right now, I'm curious from your perspective, when you went to bookstores, was there a censoring of material? Like, say, um, if there's like a provocative image. I'm thinking Jeremy Atherton Lynn,
Yeah.
the writer is coming to my mind, and his like cover right now has a bare ass on it. Like, would
Deep
that,
House, yeah.
yeah,
I don't imagine Deep House or Gay Bar are being sold on the bookshelves in the UAE. Um, there is absolutely censorship of the media landscape in terms of journalism, but also in terms of what media is shown, right? There is censoring of films, of television. Certain books are not sold in the country. Certain material is not allowed to be brought into the country. So, if you were bringing potentially material that looked especially sexually suggestive, that could be confiscated at the border. Are you going to be thrown into prison? No, you're not. But again, I think there's this pervasive narrative of like, oh my God. So yes, absolutely. Is my book on bookshelves at Kinokuniya? No, it's not. But through the magic of e-commerce, are these books still getting in? Yeah. Are people using VPNs and watching films and television shows? Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so officially, there is there's a restricted media landscape. But unofficially, yeah, people are watching and reading and
Like you can get the ebooks, you can, you know, like you said, get it sent to you. So they're not
absolutely.
like looking through your packages.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. No.
Okay, so like they can get guest privileges or,
Yeah, definitely.
other books like that or
I
watch Heated Rivalry, for example, with a
100%.
VPN.
Yes, totally. I encountered many friends who, this is going to date me a little bit, but Glee was on when I was living in the
Mm.
UAE, and that was a topic of conversation. The character of Kurt, and his visible gayness, and that whole queer storyline. So yeah, like people spoke of that. No one was like, oh, here's how you get a VPN. Like, people just have, people are technically literate, technologically literate and know how to do that kind of thing. So yeah, no, queer narratives were entering into the landscape for sure. Definitely.
Well, yeah, well, and at the same time too, like classic literature has a lot of queer narratives. Like I'm sure the picture of Dorian Gray is being sold right now. And
Yeah.
like you can use an interpretation. Like it doesn't take too much
Yeah. And,
to I'm
there's
yeah, yeah,
also,
yeah.
pre-Islamic poetry,
Yeah.
um, there are queer acts, there is same-sex love. Yeah. So that's all
Well,
present.
what did you learn from, there's so many incredible people you introduce us to in your book. Like, what did you learn about those who might have been, how they looked at being, say, devout,
Yeah.
in their religion, and then maybe those who weren't as devout? Like, did you see that there was tensions or even conversations about that and their sexuality?
Welcome to Severed, a podcast week dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA plus people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Yeah. I think I spoke of Imran, who was a figure skater from Iran. And, he was Muslim, and he was fasting, but, was queer, and, was still both kind of nominally and also, he was a practicing Muslim, but yet in other regards was, engaging in acts, queer acts. And that was a conversation that, I don't think we had on our very first day, but it's a conversation that developed as our friendship developed. There's plenty of people that I encountered who were devout in their faith. There's someone else later in the book who I met in Saudi Arabia, who was an Indian tailor, who, originally moved to Sharjah, which is a slightly more kind of socially conservative emirate in the north of the UAE. Alcohol is banned, and he spoke to me quite candidly about how he moved there kind of with the intention of being removed from a landscape of vice, and feeling as though in a moment of when he was struggling with queerness and the impulse to engage in queer acts, less about the identity. He wanted to be in a place where he felt like he might be kind of removed from that, and then moved to Saudi Arabia, and then, kind of embraced and felt like, well, maybe I can do these things, and maybe this isn't completely irreconcilable. And so I think I had the privilege of meeting many people who had a very kind of kaleidoscopic relationship with Islam, sure, but a multiplicity of religions. I interviewed folks and became friends with Hindus and Christians, and several of the people that I interviewed, and many of I spent a lot of time with Filipino cover bands. I spent a lot of time with Filipino cover bands in kind of throughout the Gulf. And, many of them are devout Catholics, and, continue to go to church several times a week, and continue to kind of adhere to their faith and have that be the guiding principle of their life, and yet also are flamboyantly queer and don't feel as though that is irreconcilable, and are able to have both of those truths in their lives. And again, I think when I first started to talk to people and gather interviews, and it became a concerted effort, a concerted journalistic effort, as opposed to just a kind of haphazard beginning, I started, I think, to ask the question first of, well, isn't this irreconcilable? And it took me a while to disavow myself of that, and feeling like, why am I putting someone else in a defensive posture? Why am I grafting my beliefs about what someone's relationship to their own religion must be? And why must that be one of the first questions that I ask them? What a deeply presumptuous and frankly very insulting way to go about having a conversation and learning about someone else's life. So, it took me, I think, a few false starts, where I recognized, and I think there are a few times that I narrativize this in the book too, where I recognized that I was asking questions all the wrong way. And so that was one of them, which is, well, why must it not be difficult for you? I said that wrong 1,000 times. Mustn't it be difficult for you? So yeah, that was something I had to relearn.
Yeah, well, and all we have to do is look at the RNC and Grinder crashing to see what's happening with evangelical Christians and open secrets. But you're right. Like I know many um who are Catholic, who are Jewish, who, you know, some are more liberal, some are, you know, more, I'll say socially conservative, but even like the Orthodox Jewish community, there are those who are open with, queer partners. But I would say, like, what did you find when you were talking, to your friends who well became your friends and to your interviewees about like respectability? Like, I was even not in this conversation with my students, but eventually, like you said, you develop a relationship and you get to know students or, those in your circle, that there is a sense of just being more aware of being respectful of like, I don't know if you saw the social media video, but recently there was an openly gay Muslim couple where the one said his parents are, fine that, he has a husband, but they don't like bring it up in every conversation. Like it's just not the starting point. Like, did you find that, like, the issue of just being even respectful with PDA doesn't mean that someone is homophobic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, right. Um, the idea that number one, everyone who is Muslim must be at odds with a queer lifestyle is obviously fundamentally incorrect, and yet a very pervasive narrative. Um, are there people of many faiths who have concerns about public displays of affection? Yeah, and I think that isn't necessarily a religious sensibility, and as you say, that might be a notion of social and public respectability. And so this is something often in thinking about the legal landscape and um, prosecution in the Gulf, which was often misconstrued, right? Which is that, oh, it is illegal to be gay, or it's illegal to be queer. And that's not, strictly speaking, quite correct. Queer acts are criminalized, and after, I'm taking the UAE now quite specifically, after some legal reform a few years ago now, generally speaking, queer acts are not have not been prosecuted for many years, and are really only prosecuted in the case of relative complaining. And so again, the penal code is such that public displays of affection that go kind of against that sort of sensibility can be prosecuted, right? So public sex can be prosecuted, but public sex in any shape, heterosexual or homosexual, same sex, is illegal, right? So there already is a kind of misconception.
And I just want to say public sex, even here,
Right,
you'll be cited if you're
right.
having public sex in North Jersey.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And so the ways in which the UAE penal code works and is constructed are not, in big bold lettering, being gay is illegal, right? So there's significantly more nuance to it than that. And then when you look at these parallels of, well, what's actually really being prosecuted, it's this kind of public morality issue. around displays of public affection, displays of sexual acts, and that's not terribly dissimilar to what you're going to find in legal landscapes across the world. So yeah, that's often frustrating and something that I needed to push back against. Cruising is a fundamental aspect of queer history. It's fundamental to who I am and how I came to understand my own queerness. It enters into the book significantly in several different chapters. I think it kind of goes through the whole narrative because it's just kind of how I've always operated. And so again, that it is a queer act. It's a political act, I feel. But often it's not just about queerness. It's also about, well, I have to do this so no one sees it, not so no one sees the same sex nature, but the sex nature.
No, thank you for that. And just because it's in my backyard, like, take a Hell's Kitchen, for example. Like, you know, is there, as you bring to bear that kind of culture of, drag culture, the performing arts, the, bar scene, even like the bathhouse scene, I don't know, you name it, basically, does exist in Abu Dhabi, or does exist, the communities exist. Like, would you say that there's a difference in how the community structure, like what you learned from those who are in the UAE?
Yeah, absolutely. There are no official third spaces that are, that advertise themselves as queer venues. That is illegal, right? So that does not exist. But we know, pre-decriminalization here in the UK and the US, there are queer spaces that do not need to themselves advertise as being a queer-friendly venue for them to become queer-friendly. And so, if you're talking about traditional bars, yes, there are bars that become kind of de facto gay bars. The other thing that's worth noting is that, some spaces, often bars need to be in hotel chains, spaces of hospitality. That's where alcohol can often be served. And so you'll often find signs that say, national dress is not allowed, which is oftentimes a kind of way of making sure that someone who's wearing visibly Muslim clothing, isn't going to be drinking alcohol in those spaces. But it can also often be used racially to keep out someone, let's say, wearing a salwar kameez from South Asia. And so that becomes a kind of class issue. And so when you're thinking about like traditional alcohol fueled often gay bars, there aren't a ton of those in, say, the UAE. But are there queer spaces? Yeah, absolutely. One that I write extensively about, which I mentioned earlier, was Filipino cover band and karaoke bars, which were incredibly racially, linguistically diverse places, where oftentimes you'd have a Filipino cover band come on, do a like intense 4-5 set evening, performing like 5 hours per night. And in between that, there would often be karaoke. And so there were these raucous spaces where people could sing songs that had queer themes, queer subtext, which wasn't, which was kind of subversive, and I guess strictly speaking, isn't allowed. And yet you're making these spaces your own. So like something like that isn't, going to advertise as a gay bar. And yet, when you enter into these spaces, you look around and, well, lo and behold, I feel like I'm surrounded by a queer community. And so how does that form, right? Like sometimes that's just what queer people have been drawn to, performance, right? We know how to perform. You think about queer theory and queer performance. that's inherent to often who we are and how we've needed to operate. Um, and so there's that issue, right? There's and then also at the same time, there are many queer residents who don't drink alcohol. And so what other spaces open up as queer, right? There are
Cafes, I'm assuming.
cafes, shisha bars. You go to a place like Kuwait, which is just absolutely filled with coffee bars, and some of them you enter into and you can immediately tell there's a queer vibe, there's a queer vibrancy here. So yeah, they're not official and yet somehow very apparent and thriving.
Yeah. Well, it just reminds me of like the 1920s bohemian scene, or even I'm a Whitman scholar, and like Whitman frequented Pfaff's cellar, which was like known for, all different avant-garde identities in Greenwich Village. So like, I want to word this, carefully, but it kind of almost seems like we're getting at a certain um pre-homosexual identity, or like, you know, a almost not thinking of sexology, like in that very Western European, well, Western British American way of thinking about, oh, okay, this is what a homosexual is. This is their identity. We now need to like craft an identity category. Like, would you say that the thinking around that, it just seems like is that where Americans just get very egotistical about, well, my system has to map on to the UAE. And if it doesn't map on, then that means the UAE is backwards.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is oftentimes one of the most difficult things to parse, which is that the notion of a queer identity in many of the people that I engaged with sexually, that I formed friendships with, that I interviewed, didn't really enter into the conversation, right? Someone who engages in queer acts, same-sex sexual acts, romance, doesn't necessarily see themselves through the lens of LGBTQ. There's a healthy there's healthy scholarship around what it means to try to disavow a lot of this. You think of Desiring Arabs, Joseph Massad, the idea that this neat categorization has done a disservice in thinking about the ways that we understand the Gulf, the Middle East. Oftentimes, again, thinking about, that's so hypocritical, right? That someone could engage in gay sex and then go to the mosque. Well, there are many religious traditions in which someone, again, is able to reconcile their own relationship with their faith and how they operate in the world. And I think it's quite abhorrent that we are the ones who deem what they're doing hypocritical, or how they should or should not understand or live their lives. There have been some good writing, some journalism. Mohammed Fairouz wrote an article a few years ago about his own faith in being from the UAE, and what it means to him to be a kind of a queer Muslim. And so once again, thinking about the disservice we have done to narrow our lens of how we understand the world, that everyone must have access to the same categorizations, must adhere to them very neatly, must see themselves through a particular lens. It does us and our imagination of how other people live a disservice. And again, here I am saying us, creating this kind of bifurcation. But it's incredibly problematic.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like we're also getting to the heart of what is happening right now, which is Western imperialism running and capitalism uh, truly just trying to exert its forces and deny, take the Palestinians, like deny them of their humanity because, there's this very bureaucratic, trying to think of how to even explain the oppressive Netanyahu regime, but just a system that is, wanting to invade for land, for building, for, just demolishing and dehumanizing and also literally killing people who are in their way. And it seems like this Western imperialist idea is something also, you reckon with in your work. Like, how do you think about Western imperialism now? I know that's a big question.
Well, yeah, it is a big question, but it's a very absolutely necessary one. Again, I think the ways that the ways in which we understand legality in the Gulf states, in the UAE, it's often spoken of as, this arcane legal system, Sharia. But it's not a legal system. It's a methodology of legislation, right? It's used to interpret and create civil law across Islamic countries, and so there are many different schools of Sharia, of legal scholarship. And so again, this notion that like there's one Islamic like monolithic legal system is like already incorrect. And then when you apply that to queerness and think about again, it's just blanket illegal to be there. You will be put to death. I think that was something that I continually had to push back against. This notion of the death penalty is this sort of specter that hangs over the Gulf states. I think it's the way that people, it's this sort of bogeyman of this will potentially happen to you if you're there. You'll be put to death. And there are so many layers that have to be peeled back, like going back to, well, British imperialism created a lot of the legal framework in many of the Gulf states, right? When Qatar was a British protectorate, that's when same-sex relationship was codified as being illegal. So, and then you look
Sodomy
at,
laws that
yeah,
persecuted
absolutely.
Oscar Wilde.
Totally, right? It's a very similar situation, and so you think of a place like Bahrain, which has its own nuance, right? Like 1974, same-sex relationships were decriminalized. Same-sex relations were decriminalized because the British imperial legal structure was pulled back. So it's like it actually took taking that imperialistic framework away for there to be a kind of legal liberation. Am I saying that, in Bahrain, now you're going to find same-sex couples walking around hand in hand? No. Again, there are, legal frameworks around public decency that prevent that. But what was hanging over it officially was a kind of hangover of imperial legal structures. So, those continue to pervade the Gulf, the Middle East, the world. It's something that, but again, I think it's so easy to point fingers at them over there. I think about, I grew up in the United Methodist Church, which had its own kind of schism a few years ago. And it was sort of seen as, well, the Western United Methodist churches are socially progressive and want to allow same-sex clergies and to bless same-sex marriages. But it's those, places where the faith has gone, the Philippines and Africa, where they're not allowing that to happen anymore. And like, again, we have to pull that back of, okay, well, some of the legal frameworks that are there that maybe are causing some of this, again, are imperial, have an imperial history. So there's that. But secondly, like creating this, like, very neat bifurcation of who is accepting this and who is absolutely not accepting this is just incredibly dangerous and misguided. So once again, it's like, so these issues are happening in other faiths as well. The ways in which we have shorthand are often this colonial history that we don't even know we're employing, but there it is in our brains, on our tongues, everywhere.
Yeah. Well, do you have 10 more minutes? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just
Absolutely.
like, this is so fascinating. And I so thank you. I mean, you're just such a wealth of knowledge, and your book is just incredibly well
Thank
done.
you very much.
And I'm also thinking too, just about the way that same-sex friendships are seen. Like I'm thinking specifically about how male friends have such an intimacy um that like if I'm with my husband, say in Abu Dhabi, and we're on the sidewalk and I give him a kiss on the cheek, like I would assume like people, might just think, oh, they're good friends. Like, is that something like how does a kiss get registered? I don't know. That kind of sounds like a conference paper, but
It's a great question, right? And so again, I think once again, we first need to consider who are we assuming is around us and
Mhm.
what are we assuming are their, the worldviews and their beliefs. Um, 4 out of 5 people that you're going to be looking at around you in most instances are not going to be from the UAE. So are going to have their own kind of ways of understanding and navigating what might go through their head when they see a same-sex kiss. Um, if you take a step away from that for 1 second, you will often see a lot of physical platonic intimacy between men, but also between women in public spaces in the Gulf, in Muslim countries, um, also in South Asia. And so when I'm walking down the street in Abu Dhabi, in Doha, in any kind of place in Oman, I am seeing often South Asian men who are holding hands or holding pinkies or being very physically affectionate. Um, and I think, yeah, you might read that as, oh, that's got to be queer, but it's not necessarily queer. But first of all, how do you define queer? But like, does it mean they're engaging in same-sex acts? No, it doesn't. So I think you're going to see more of that than you might expect if this is, your first time being in a place like that. If you are removed from that cultural tradition, walking down the street, holding pinkies, holding hands, probably might register differently. It's something that my now husband and I joked about often. His parents emigrated from India to Australia about 50 years ago. And he spent 12 years in the Gulf. And when we, were developing our relationship, we'd make sort of dark humor jokes about, well, one of us can, hold pinkies, but the other one can't, right? That it would mean something different for me as a white man to be walking down the street holding pinkies with someone than it might be a South Asian looking man. So that I think is, has a racial element to it as well. But like a peck on the cheek isn't something I think you're going to see very often. But physicality, I think, is something you're going to see more often of. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But like you're saying, at the end of the day, if I kissed my husband on the sidewalk, there isn't like a morality police
Right.
in Abu Dhabi taking us away.
No, no,
And see,
absolutely not.
that's like that stereotype, that very harmful stereotype that, like you said, there's so much unlearning, and it's like it seems very, this could be for another episode, if you'll come on in another few months, which is like it seems like this type of propaganda in the West is so strategic because it's like constantly trying to make the Middle East into an other
Yeah,
and like
absolutely.
trying to see yourself away from that culture.
Yeah, yeah. You know, let's return to like this notion of the kiss.
Mhm.
Um, I just think we as queer people have spent oftentimes our entire life internalizing how we should navigate various spaces, right? And I think we develop a kind of fluency oftentimes in ways in which to be subversive, in ways in which, oh, I'm gonna like put my head down for 2 seconds, right? So it's like, I'm probably not going to give a peck on the cheek outside a police station. Would I do that in a mall? Probably not. Once again, you're going to have security cameras. You're going to have you know people who are walking around who work for that private establishment, private security. But like, is there going to be like a red alarm that goes off in the mall? No. But like, it's about these sort of degrees of peril and where and how we choose to act out our full selves and our impulses. But like, there were plenty of times when I was driving around with my, now husband, and we were just holding hands and we would kiss in the car. And that's something that, we would decide and figure out how to navigate as we went. So yeah, I think is the notion of like, no, you'll never see a same-sex act of affection. Like, no, you absolutely will. And the idea that like, if you do one, you're going to be like dragged away. I really do, because I've heard it, people think that that's really going to happen. Right. So it's about disavowing yourself with that too.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a, xenophobic boogeyman type of panic. It's a moral panic.
It's
Yeah.
a moral panic. Absolutely. Here
Yeah.
I am in a landscape that is unforgiving and repressive, and therefore being here alone is imperiling, which isn't the case.
Yeah. And also at the end of the day, the world doesn't revolve around one person.
Yeah.
I just want to say that. It's just,
right.
And
it's like the idea that like everyone's just like watching out for everyone else. Just is such a misguided.
Yeah. Like no one has a notebook and they're like just standing in one spot monitoring,
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the person running America right now, I would say we've got a narcissist running rampant. So
who would be like crestfallen if not everyone were looking at him at every moment.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the problem right now.
It is. How we breathlessly give our time and space to this man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The less we give that energy, the more deflated.
Yeah. Like, and it's in these moments where I'm like, okay, let's do less of the cult of personality and speaking about who he is, and let's talk about substantive issues and policies and rhetoric, because that's what matters.
Exactly. I agree. Well, I could talk to you forever. This was so fascinating. Thank you so much, Gaar. Guest privileges. Where can everyone, get their hands on your book, Gaar?
Well, here in the UK, across the US, should be available in most bookstores. I've been really lucky to be living here in the UK and having a wonderful publisher here and having a separate publisher in the US. And yeah, you should be able to find them. So
yeah, I know in Manhattan it's definitely at Book Culture by Columbia and all of the independent bookstores.
Yeah, I was in New York a few months ago and it was a really lovely thing, just kind of walk around. I haven't been in New York for a while, so it's nice to kind of see it out in the world.
Yeah, well, London is enjoyable. I miss London. I was there at the British Library looking at Oscar Wilde manuscripts.
Oh, wonderful.
During my time at Stony Brook. I was in I think it's still there. It's like is it pronounced St. Giles? I always say Giles, but there's like a little casino and I was like in the hotel there. I loved it. Now everyone's going to start going to that hotel, but it was a great place. It really is. Very nice. Well, thank you so much. And how can everyone follow you too on social media?
I have a dormant Twitter account, X account. Yeah. I'm not going to say that. But I have an Instagram account, Gaar.Adams, I believe is what it is. I have a website. You can find me.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. And,
Yeah.
hopefully, yes, everyone get their hands on guest privileges, but also, we need to, specifically from an American context, literature is power
Yeah.
and art is power. And deconstructing these stereotypes relies on us gaining access. Like, this material exists to
Yeah.
educate ourselves about the Middle East and the
Yeah.
culture there.
The idea that I shouldn't engage at all in the Gulf because I see it as a repressive place feels quite misguided, and also feels like the inability then to look upon the self and where someone is coming from, and their own legal frameworks. So yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Gar. And yeah, until next time.
Yeah. Thanks.